Have you ever felt like you were paying too high a price for the calling God gave you? As if instead of blessings, all you received were struggles, betrayal, and loneliness? Well, I need to tell you a hard but liberating truth. Being chosen comes at a cost, and not everyone is ready to pay that price. The Bible is full of examples of people who went through fire before seeing the fulfillment of the promise. Joseph was sold by his own brothers, thrown into prison unjustly, but in the end, God placed him on Egypt's throne. Elijah experienced God's power like few others, but then found himself in the desert, fleeing and feeling alone. Job lost everything before being restored. Sound familiar? If you're going through trials, it may be that God is preparing you for something far greater than you can imagine. Now let me ask you, have you ever felt that the more you seek God, the more the battles increase? Comment here and share your greatest struggle. I want to know how you're facing this process, because one thing I can guarantee, if you endure, the reward will come. Being chosen by God is not a privilege free of challenges. It is a call to something greater. Many expect a divine calling to bring immediate comfort and honor, but the reality is different. Since biblical times, those set apart for a purpose have faced intense trials. Abraham, for example, had to leave his land and everything he knew, trusting only in the promise of an invisible God. This kind of obedience requires courage and unwavering faith, as there are not always visible guarantees along the way. A divine calling brings with it an invisible war where spiritual forces try to hinder the progress of the chosen one. Joseph was sold by his own brothers and thrown into prison for something he didn't do, but all of it was part of God's greater plan. The suffering and injustice were not signs of divine abandonment, but stepping stones toward the fulfillment of his purpose. Those who are chosen must understand that attacks are not coincidences, but confirmations of their destiny. The greater the calling, the more intense the opposition will be. Loneliness is another price that many chosen ones pay. Elijah, even after a great victory against the prophets of Baal, felt alone and discouraged in the desert. The journey of those set apart for a purpose often leads them away from friends, family, and even those who once supported them. This isolation, however, is not abandonment. God always sustains his own, providing in the right time, just as he did with Elijah by sending him bread and water in the midst of the drought. But why so much suffering? The fire of trials does not destroy, it refines. Job lost everything, faced deep pain and questioning, but his faithfulness led him to even greater restoration. Suffering purifies, breaks pride, and strengthens faith, preparing the chosen one to carry something greater. Those who endure the process will ultimately experience the fulfillment of the promise. The question is, are we ready to pay the price? History has always proven that being chosen means carrying a burden that few can bear. Abraham was called to be the father of a great nation, but before that, he had to leave his land, his relatives, and everything familiar to him. His faith was tested to the extreme when God asked for his son Isaac as a sacrifice. Imagine the anguish. But a true chosen one learns that obedience is worth more than immediate understanding. God always has a greater plan behind every difficult request. Joseph is another example of how the path of the chosen one includes betrayal and injustice. God gave him great dreams, but before seeing them fulfilled, he had to endure the contempt of his own brothers, slavery, and wrongful imprisonment. Everything seemed like a huge setback, but in reality, it was a divine refining process. When he finally reached Egypt's throne, Joseph understood that every pain was necessary to fulfill his purpose and save many lives. Elijah, on the other hand, experienced loneliness in an intense way. Even after demonstrating God's power against the prophets of Baal, he felt alone and afraid of persecution. he fled to the desert and wished for death. This proves that even the strongest spiritually go through moments of weakness. However, God did not abandon him. In the silence of the wind and the gentle breeze, Elijah found the strength to continue. This teaches us that in the midst of trials, God reveals himself in unexpected ways. These stories show a clear pattern. Before exaltation, there is humiliation. Before the promise, there is preparation. Before the reward, there is sacrifice. Abraham, Joseph, and Elijah were not chosen by chance, but because they were willing to pay the price. God's calling never comes without challenges, but it also never comes without purpose. The question remains, are we truly willing to follow this path, no matter the cost? Every chosen one faces battles beyond what the eyes can see. The enemy does not attack those who are stagnant, but those who carry a divine purpose. Joseph was not thrown into prison by accident, but because he carried a promise that Satan wanted to destroy. Likewise, those who receive a calling face intense opposition. Injustices, persecutions, and unexpected crises are often signs that something great is about to happen. These battles do not mean that God has abandoned the chosen ones. Rather, he is allowing spiritual training. Before David became king, he had to face a lion, a bear, and a giant. Each battle was a stepping stone in his preparation. Similarly, today's challenges are strengthening the faith and character of those who have been called. Those who run from the battle also run from the blessing that will come after it. Elijah faced not only human enemies, but also evil forces working through Queen Jezebel. The persecution against him was not just political, but spiritual. The devil knew Elijah carried a powerful anointing and tried to silence him through fear and exhaustion. This is a common strategy against the chosen ones, making them feel weak, alone, and tempted to give up on their calling. But true victory is not in human strength. It is in unshakable trust in God. Spiritual warfare is a sign that something great is on the way. If the enemy is fighting so hard to stop it, it's because the impact will be enormous. That's why giving up is not an option. Every resistance faced today is paving the way for a future of great victories. The question is, are we prepared to fight to the end? Being chosen by God often means walking alone. Elijah, after confronting the prophets of Baal and witnessing fire descend from heaven, found himself fleeing into the wilderness, feeling like the only faithful one left. That isolation was not a punishment, but part of the process. God allows moments of solitude to teach that dependence should be on him, not on people. Those with a great calling cannot rely on human validation, as not everyone will understand their journey. Joseph experienced this truth firsthand. Betrayed by his brothers, forgotten in prison, he had to learn to trust God when no one else stood by him. That period was essential in shaping him, preparing him to lead Egypt. Isolation is not a sign of defeat, but a time of refinement. God uses solitude to set apart his chosen ones, strengthening their identity and faith so that, at the right moment, they are ready for their purpose. Even Jesus faced moments of deep loneliness. In Gethsemane, when he needed support the most, his disciples fell asleep. On the cross, he experienced abandonment, even crying out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God himself went through this, it is no surprise that those who follow his calling will face similar moments. But it is in those moments that God's voice becomes clearer and his presence becomes more real. The loneliness of the chosen is not an end, but a means. It is in silence that God reveals mysteries, in isolation that he builds leaders, and in the apparent absence of support that he becomes the only foundation. Those who do not understand this process may give up along the way, but those who endure discover that they were never truly alone. The question is, can we trust God even when everyone else walks away? The suffering of the chosen is not in vain, but a refining process. Just as gold must go through fire to be purified, those called by God face trials that remove impurities like pride, doubt, and fear. Job experienced this intensely. He lost everything, endured physical and emotional pain, and was questioned even by his friends. Yet he remained faithful, and in the end he received double blessings. The fire does not destroy the chosen, it only makes them stronger. Moses also went through his period of purification. After growing up in a palace, he had to spend 40 years in the wilderness before he was ready to lead the people of Israel. That time in obscurity was not a punishment, but training. God does not raise leaders hastily. He shapes them in silence, in suffering, and through experiences that demand complete dependence on Him. When the time for his calling finally arrived, Moses was prepared to bear the weight of the mission. The fire of trials also reveals those who truly trust in God. 3. Hebrew young men were thrown into a blazing furnace for refusing to worship a human king. Instead of running or giving in to pressure, they placed their full trust in the Lord. The result, God did not deliver them from the fire, but delivered them in the fire. When trials come, it does not mean that God has abandoned the chosen, but that He is there, sustaining them in the flames. Suffering is never comfortable, but it is necessary. Those who desire great promises must go through great processes. Many want the reward without paying the price, but God's kingdom does not work that way. Those who endure the fire come out stronger, wiser, and more prepared for what God has for them. The question is, are we willing to trust, even when everything around us seems to be burning? Being chosen requires sacrifices, but God never leaves a calling without a reward. Joseph, after years of suffering and injustice, was elevated to the highest position in Egypt after Pharaoh. Everything that seemed like a delay was actually an alignment for something greater. In the same way, those who remain faithful in the process see God's promises fulfilled. Suffering may last for a season, but the reward comes at the right time and always surpasses the pain. Jesus made it clear that those who sacrifice for Him will receive 100 times more in this life and in eternity. Peter asked, "Lord, we have left everything to follow you. What will we have?" And Jesus responded by guaranteeing an eternal inheritance. This shows that God does not overlook the efforts of His chosen ones. Every sacrifice, every battle, every tear has a purpose. In the end, He always honors those who persevere to the finish line. However, the reward is not just material. The chosen experience a level of intimacy with God that few ever know. Moses spoke with God face to face. David was called a man after God's own heart, and Paul received revelations that no one else had. The true wealth of the chosen is not just what they possess, but who they become through the process. They carry something that no amount of money can buy, the glory of God upon their lives. Yet, many give up before reaching that reward. The path is narrow, the battle is tough, and the waiting can be long. But those who endure, trust, and remain steadfast see God turn every pain into purpose, every tear into joy, and every struggle into victory. In the end, the question remains, are we willing to endure the process to live the extraordinary plans that God has prepared? The chosen do not live just for themselves. Their lives impact generations. Abraham did not see the fullness of the promise in his lifetime, but his obedience paved the way for an innumerable descendants. When God calls someone, He is not thinking only of that person, but of everyone who will be touched by their faithfulness. Many of the blessings we reap today are the result of seeds planted by those who in the past chose to remain firm in their purpose. David is another example. His reign was not just about military victories, but about establishing a spiritual legacy. His heart for God influenced generations to the point that Jesus was called the Son of David. Every battle he won, every psalm he wrote, has transcended centuries and continues to impact lives today. This proves that the obedience of a chosen one is not limited to their own time, but echoes throughout eternity. Jesus' disciples also teach us this lesson. Simple men, fishermen, and tax collectors were transformed into apostles who changed the course of history. They faced persecution, imprisonment, and even death, yet they remained faithful. Today, more than 2,000 years later, the message of the gospel still reaches people because of the legacy they left behind. This makes us reflect. What are we building that will last beyond our lifetime? The true impact of the chosen is not in wealth or status, but in how much their life points to God. Those who accept the calling understand that their mission does not end with themselves. Every decision, every sacrifice, and every step of faith do not just affect the present, but shape the future of many. The big question is, how do we want to be remembered? If there is one certainty in the journey of the chosen, it is that God never forgets those who remain faithful. The path may be lonely, painful, and full of challenges, but the reward always surpasses the sacrifice. No tear shed for the love of God is in vain. He sees every struggle, every sacrifice, and every silent battle. In the end, the chosen do not just survive. They triumph because God's promise never fails. The greatest mistake someone can make is to give up in the middle of the process. History is full of examples of people who were on the verge of victory but turned back at the last moment. Faith must be greater than fear, and perseverance must be unshakable. When everything seems to be against you, remember, it is always darkest before dawn. Those who endure until the end witness the glory of God in ways they never imagined. What sets the chosen apart from those who are lost along the way is the ability to trust even without understanding. God never promised an easy journey, but He guaranteed His presence in every step. The fire of trials does not burn those who trust in Him. On the contrary, it strengthens them. Isolation, spiritual battles, and suffering are merely part of the refining process for something greater. So if today feels difficult, remember that God's faithfulness is unshakable. Sacrifice always precedes the reward, and every chosen one is shaped by the journey before reaching their destination. The final question is, are you willing to pay the price to live the purpose God has for you? If you have come this far, it is because you know that the price of being chosen is not small. But now I ask you, are you willing to pay that price? Because in the end, those who remain steadfast see the reward that God promised. Nothing that comes from God is easy, but everything that comes from Him is worth it. Many give up along the way because they don't understand that pain is part of the process. But what about you? Will you let the struggles stop you, or will you use every battle as a stepping stone toward God's purpose for your life? Comment below. What has been your biggest challenge on this journey? I want to hear your story. And if this video spoke to you, go ahead and like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content. Here, we talk about faith, purpose, and real life. Let's walk this journey together until the end.